Okay, today we're talking about sketching figures. Now, let's start with first. Let's first talk about the materials that we work with. Now, primarily to start with, you want to keep things as simple as you possibly can. Now, today I'm going to be taking and drawing large because I'm taking and trying to demonstrate and show to you. But normally when I'm out sketching figures, usually I'll work with a small sketchbook like this. It can be something that's handy. I've done most of my drawings, I shouldn't say most of them, a lot of my drawing on the outside when I'm just sitting out in a restaurant, what have you, drawing in sketchbooks or napkins. These are some loose drawings just of my children. I just happen to have some paper floating around and I did these. Now, materials other than what you draw on can be, you try to keep it very, very simple. I use a pen a very large percentage of the time. I have, this sketchbook is, this one particular is just where I keep drawings of my children. So every few months I take and I do some drawings. And it happens to be with whatever I happen to have handy. So I start out with, we've got drawings, and here we've got pencil, just plain old graphite pencil. Then this is done with what's called a brush pen. Now, from there, so I did a series of those. I've got, also notice the scale that the drawings are. These are very, very, very small. There's no need to take and do very, very large drawings. Now these are done with a regular sort of a red pencil, again, a Prismacolor. These are graphite. Here we have just a standard ballpoint pen. So but here we go back to the brush pen. So what you work with is really a matter of sort of personal preference, but the idea is to keep it as very simple as you possibly can. When I go out sketching, I try not to take anything more than I can carry in my pocket, in my hand. And if I want to be someplace out in public where I don't want an audience, I'll use a smaller sketchbook even there. Now, from there, I want to take and draw from some different artists here. And the biggest problem that we always tend to, when we're looking at the past or we're looking at artists to study from, we have a tendency to be preoccupied with the differences. What's unique about this artist? Well, that's great from art history point of view, but it doesn't serve us a lot of good when we're trying to take and create. What we're more interested in is what are the similarities, what are the practical things that this artist did that can help us to take and create our own work. So I'm not going to say who these are first. I want to take and first show you how similar these artists are. Okay, now here, it starts out very, very simple shape. Now remember, I'm drawing in considerably larger scale. The original was probably no larger than probably about like that. So you get an idea. Okay. Very simple shape of a head here. Came in, takes in part of a torso. Very feet are really just very, very simple, again, shapes here. In fact, he didn't even draw anything to do with the head. There's no features or anything in it. Now, this next figure that he sketched here is, and he just used something to indicate a head. Now, these are very, very quick sketches. It's the type of sketch that one would be doing. One was taking and going out and standing in public, waiting for a streetcar or train or whatever. And just concentrating on the action or the gesture of the figure. There's no concern or consideration in this drawing to take and be detailed per se. He's not doing a portrait. He's just taking and as the word sketching implies, is sketching what this figure was doing. Or it could have even been something he was just sketching out of his head. Okay, that's one artist. Now here's another artist. Okay, now I'm just going to do one of the figures here out of this whole large group. Secondary figure over here. And again, what we find is a very, very simple shape. The torso actually works out to be almost a box. You'll notice I'm not, again, I'm repeating it again, I'm not paying any attention to any kind of anatomical detail. I'm really just working with the shape. Okay. Now, these two artists, now I could take and go on and show you lots and lots of different artists, but these two artists are separated by time, continents, and cultures. This is from Rembrandt. We're going to do some more from Rembrandt, and this is Hokusai, a very, very famous Japanese artist. Now, the practicality of what they're doing. Now, we tend to forget that as artists, you have to be extremely practical. Artists have an image of being very scatterbrained and non-practical. Well, in fact, you have to be extremely practical and logical to take and actually complete anything. Now, there's three main things that you have to take and create anything, to get anything accomplished. One is you have to have a method or a plan of attack. You have to have some kind of a system to taking and approaching what you're doing. Secondly, you have to take and have the knowledge to take and put this procedure or this method into actual onto the paper. And third, you have to take and have the spirit that's going to take and carry the thing through. The thing that really, the artistic element in it. You have to have that quality and the drive to take and carry this thing through to a completion. Okay, so the system part of it is very, very simple, and it is very, very, again, it's an extremely logical type of process. Now what I want to do is I'm going to take and draw some more from Rembrandt, and we'll take a drawing here and go fairly, spend a little bit of time on here and go fairly complete with this. Okay, now this is a group of figures. Now, and in doing the group of figures, you would do exactly the same thing. Now the first step, and this is, you can make it as a very clear-cut formula or a procedure, the method, is that you take and you go for the shape. Now, starting with this, start to see, okay, first there's a woman seated, and again, you don't try to take and deal with the features. We tend to, as when we're starting out learning how to draw, we tend to draw subjectively. We draw the things that psychologically interest us, basically, which usually becomes the features. Notice, for instance, here, I'm not dealing, I'm getting a head, this is the covering on her head. Simple shape for an arm coming down. Here, arm coming across. Notice, again, no detail. There's another figure taking and seated. Here, I'm not going to do all of these figures. I just want to take and I'm going to do several drawings and several different people here yet. This comes across the hand through here. Okay. Now, I'm primarily drawing this two-dimensionally. I'm not taking and worrying at all about trying to create any volume with it. That becomes the second step. First step, I said, is to take and just look at a flat, simple shape. Now, from this point on, what we do is we take and the second step. So first is shape. Number two, we start to take and try to create and sense the volume that's taking place. Okay. Now, in doing this, you have to take and try to think of the lines as being descriptive lines. They're taking and going over and around a surface. That's something that takes and shows that the thing has volume. So starting with here, going back, I'll just work my way down, starting with the hat here, or the bonnet. We take and make an emphasis. We really start to see now how things go behind. You can see the lines that he has drawn on here, where he's gone over the surface and behind. He's drawn lines coming through here. He's selective about what lines he makes stronger. There's a band that goes around the forehead, creating the volume through. He even uses the tone here a bit to take and start to show a front and a side. Now, the features, the first step is to take and just sort of start blocking it in. Again, not detail, but just a very sort of simple shape. Okay, now, top shawl here that she has over her, it goes around and over the shoulder. So all the lines that I'm doing here, they're descriptive primarily in terms of volume. It goes back underneath. Now, if you take and approach your drawing in a very, very systemized manner, you find that you can take and accomplish a lot more. You only have to think then about one thing at a time. Primarily start to take and work with the shape. Secondly, and like I said, again repeating, you go for the volume. You've already got the shape fairly established. You're still dealing with shape when you're dealing with the volume, but the large, simple placements have already been taken and accomplished for you. Okay, I want to get this arm, like the hand, okay, this very simple shape. I want to get this arm to come out, so I take and what Rembrandt did here is he take and just draw lines around that arm. He uses the drapery to create that volume, but the line's going around the form, seeing around. Okay. It's going over. Same thing here. We start with a very, very nondescript sort of shape for an arm. The next step, again, is to draw around, down. The sleeve becomes a great device for showing the arm coming forward. The hand is really, he doesn't sit there and worry about how to draw fingers. He just takes and gets sort of an indication. It's a sketch. It's not a fancy rendering. Okay. The next head here, same thing. We start out with a very sort of simple shape, then I come around, go over. She has a cap on, shape of the hair, going around. We keep breaking it down into smaller and smaller fragments. Head coming around through here, face, okay. Collar. We have to envision the neck as being a simple cylinder, and we see the collar wrapping around, sleeves, a little more shape to it. Okay, this you can start getting the general idea, the idea of going from a very, very simple shape to taking and starting to see the volume. Now I want to take and do another Rembrandt here. Okay, this is a group of 3 figures. Actually, there's a whole bunch. This is actually a compositional sketch for a painting. Now, again, even in a drawing like this, the drawing is thought of as sort of a completed thing in itself. What we find as you start, though, you take, and I'm only going to concentrate on the one figure here. Now we take and first, and we can see the procedure. If you look at Rembrandt's drawings, you can see the procedure very clearly. Very simple shapes. You look at the size comparison. You look at the size of this to the size of that, and continually start to be aware of differences. But don't fall into a trap of taking and getting wrapped up in the detail. And this becomes a real difficult effort. You really have to concentrate and force yourself to see the big elements in the drawing. And this really becomes fun when you start going out and sitting in a park or in a bus stop and start looking at people and start to see what kind of shapes they really are. It can be very, very, very interesting. Okay, now here we have the basic outline. Now from here we take and again start looking at the volume. Start to take and within this very, very simple shape, take and start to see the differences. Okay, now he's got this is a turban type of hat shape coming around. Notice I'll go over the surface and I start to see how that breaks up. Get a little variety in here. Across, around, forms, go over, around. He picks up a little shape, a larger shape, back. Okay. The head within this is kept very simple. It's the shape of a nose. See the beard sticking out, line of the neck coming down, an ear, and a little bit of hair. So you can see with a very, very simple means here, I've taken and really starting to take, and you can see the drawing develop. Now, okay, the collar going around the neck. And it just takes that little bit of hook going around a form. You try to think of the thing carrying through. Pulling over, and from behind. Okay, lines are going over the shoulder. Feel the shape. He uses the seam of how the sleeve fits into the shoulder to take and start to help us describe the volume. We feel this going around and tucking in behind. Going down, over, the sleeve going over the arm, back, gives us a little bit of detail in here. Go behind. It creates the fold. Again, it's a device for helping us to see the volume. Create some more folds going around the arm. The other shoulder, the other side coming out, going in. Now, I'm not sure what this is supposed to be in here, but it looks like it's some kind of a wrapping or a cloak pulled around his back here, but it makes a nice shape. It's an interesting shape. You feel this taking and coming around, okay, over, yeah, over, things coming out from behind, overlapping, underneath, the leg. The foot is really no different than what I've already got in the simple lay-in. He just draws a couple of bands over it to give us a sense of the maybe wearing sandals or something. Helps to show the volume. We feel some depth in here. We feel the shape coming through here. We feel back behind. That's another fold coming out in front. And this is actually covered up by another figure that's taking place here. The hand is, again, extremely simple. It looks more like a mitten. Okay, now I mentioned we had basically, there's 3 steps in the drawing. One, first was to get the simple shape. Second, to get the volume. The third element is to take and you start to emphasize, or this is a variable type thing. You could come back in and start to say, well, maybe I want to take and accent something. I want to start making something a little stronger. Also, the bringing in or introduction of tone that helps to take and start to create the volume a bit more. Like, for instance, what he's done here, he's taken and given a light source by taking and pushing the front part of the figure in tone. And it doesn't have to be a fancy rendering. It's just a very simple, flat tone that takes and gives us a sense of a light direction. Here he's got the shadow being cast on the leg. Now, quite often this is taken and done with a brush. Now, I mentioned that I do a lot of my sketching with a brush pen. Well, this is what a brush pen is. And it's the same thing. You take and you work at a very, very small scale. You can work fairly large. But I can take and block in or any kind of ink and wash type of thing. You look at the Hokusai drawings, they were all done with basically a brush. Now, let's take a look at somebody else, a little bit different. Okay, this is Rubens. Now, Rubens was a different personality. He drew differently. He was a just a different artist. Every artist, his own personality, is going to take these basic, simple formulas and to take and bend them and use them in their own way. Now, these drawings I like just because of what they demonstrate. Here, I use these in my classes teaching all the time. That here, you look at the drawings, and it's the same basic idea. He is primarily concerned with getting an action. And so the drawing is not concerned with any kind of detail. He just takes and he's not interested in, here so far I've been, like I say, I've been drawing one very simple shape. Well, if you're searching for a form, a lot of times that first line isn't right. And so you find that you take and you draw lots of lines trying to take and find the right one. Now, you look at this and you can say, well, you sort of get the idea. There's a figure here, maybe moving forward as the foot comes out here, going back here. Now, this is the way he started his drawings. And people are always amazed to find it because they are used to looking at Rubens, they're thinking of a very, very finished, polished drawings. Well, most of his drawings in the starting stages are anything but that beautiful line that we're used to seeing. Let me take and go through here, and I'm going to do a little thing with the chamois here too at the same time. Now, on one side of this illustration is a drawing that was started, and the other side is a completed drawing. They were both done exactly the same way. He started one and he abandoned it, and then he took and started another one because he changed the pose. He turned the figure around. Instead of a back view, he's got a front view, and he just decided that he wanted a different compositional thing. But the drawing, and I'll start to do this drawing the same way that he's shown the way he starts his drawing here. And it's always going for the general, the very, very simple shape. So you can see that he starts out very loose. You can look at this stuff and say, it's the kind of drawings that if we were doing them, we would probably throw them away. Notice how no concern for any kind of anatomical consideration here at all. Just taking and I'm just going to really concentrate on just sort of this one figure here, but you can start to see, like he would start off with something like this, come in, very simple, very loose, then start to clarify it. And notice that I'm using a lot of very simple straight lines, which seems to be a contradiction for a lot of people. When they think of Rubens, they normally think of him as dealing with lots of round, voluptuous females. And in reality, the beginning of the drawings were very simple, very straight. Okay, notice I'm just slowly taking and clarifying these basic simple shapes, simple volumes, no anatomical real considerations yet at all. Very, very rough. Now from here, what he did was to take and start thinking about the volume, but doing the volume by using a tone. Now I'm going to use a chamois here because it's simple to demonstrate up here. I've just taken a little bit of charcoal off of my sand pad. And this is a very convenient way to work. You can see the kind of tone that you can get. So what he does is he comes in and he starts to essentially draw some of the mass, clarify it by working with the tone. Notice he's separating this figure from that figure, or that from that, by using the tone. He even comes in and he will take and use a little tone in the background to start to get the thing to go back. Now I talk about this later in another tape where we discuss working with tone. But you can see how this fits into the same kind of logic. First you go for a simple shape, then you go for starting to think of the volume. Now from here he would take and go in and start to actually draw around, creating around the form. Notice how I'm starting now. I'm thinking in terms of round. The thing starts to take on a different quality. It doesn't take very much to start to get away from that very, very simple blocking look. And his drawing is actually a pen drawing where he takes and uses the lines to take and go over the form. Blocking. Okay. Around, overlapping. Now the head, instead of necessarily starting with the features right away, but we find that first we take and we indicate where they are. Notice simple formulas for placement. You use the hair as a means of going around the head. Down. The drapery, it takes and wraps around the form. It becomes a tool for taking and showing volume. Now there's an arm that comes out of here, a hand coming through in here. So the drapery comes round from behind, tucks through here, over that arm, comes from behind. She's holding on to it, pulls out. Around. Okay, the tone helps to go around. Okay, again, it's the same exact logic. Going from the simple, you start getting more and more complex. Now there's another artist, like Rubens here, we said the beginning looked a little different than Rembrandt's, but it's the same thinking process. I want to show you another artist that, again, the same logic is there, but it has just a little different flavor to it. This is Daumier. Now Daumier, of course, is noted for his political cartoons and his etchings, what have you. He's a marvelous artist, but an extraordinary draftsman. And he used to sit in courts and take and make little clay models and do these drawings of judges and what have you. And he ended up in jail quite often for doing it. But the way that he worked is an extremely useful way of taking and sketching. Like his primarily, we refer to as sort of the scribble approach to drawing, where he would take and start out, and again, just extremely free type of thing. There's no concern for detail, just a very, very general type of shape. Now this is a very appealing approach to taking and sketching figures. One that really anybody can do it. The hardest problem about doing it is the psychological problem of taking and freeing yourself to do it. Much of our learning how to draw is a mental process. You have to have the nerve to take and do it. You have to have the nerve to take and just start putting lines down without being concerned that it doesn't look like what you think it's supposed to look like. The idea is that, and again, the key word in what we're talking about here is you're sketching. You're not doing a rendering. It's a sketching the figure. You're sketching the action. Now, these are a series of heads that he was doing. Now, if you look at things, the end product here was a line drawing. But if you look carefully at the drawing, you can see what he had underneath was a pencil drawing. Now, I want to start to take and draw a little more emphasis on another aspect of the thing I've talked a little bit about, is now start talking in the beginning about shape. Now you have to really concentrate in terms and think in terms of shape. This is really what differentiates and really creates the kind of characters that we see. Now, in the beginning, the drawing can be, and I'm doing a Daumier here, very, very loose. There's a head coming out here, but already he's looking at the model and seeing the characteristic shape. She's got this long chin, comes out, got a nose that's sticking out. The head is leaning forward, sort of a hunched back here. Shoulder is coming out. Notice that I'm not academic here. Anybody can do this. That it's more of the mental thing of not allowing yourself to do it. The hand is just really just sort of a ball here, a little scribble coming down through here. Now, what he does is he starts coming back in here and discerning differences. He starts to take and push it a little bit more. Now we start to look at this hat, and he starts to really, he's changed it, he's adjusted it, come back, and the shape of this thing, he really got a point here, the point of this hat. And he has what he starts picking up what we call a theme. He starts to say, okay, this is a very pointed face. And so he starts picking up shapes that tend to show that. Now, we always play with opposites. We've got a sharp point here. We start to create sort of a rounded shape here. But you can see how that really comes to a point. Okay, now the rest of the face, got the nose, again, is a very sharp, angular nose. The eyes are set in here. Okay. Mouth, this pulls out. Again, a simple shape, line coming back. Sharp chin. And just very simple lines coming through. Okay? And the rest of the stuff is generated very sort of casual lines, just suggesting. But the idea of taking and working with the shape. Now, here's a clean paper here. This is another Daumier. Now, here, and he comes back in and starts working with the wash. But again, it's the first stages of the drawing are this. He's taking and he gets up there and he really emphasizes. This is a juggler or a clown and a drummer. This guy's going up, standing on a chair, and he would always look for differences. And we get this guy really going up here, sitting here, coming down. And as this is up and big, you find the next figure here is taking and is down and round. So you get a contrast. So you can understand his thinking in here. Okay? Now I don't want to talk about composition here so much, but the drawing it's also intertwined. You have to, as you're drawing, start becoming conscious now of what it is and how you're drawing it. Okay. Now, the primary thing, which applies to the simple procedure, is the shape. You look for the shape. You see one shape is always compared against another shape. When you start to look at the differences. Here, it's a big difference of this shape against that. Now, in here, as he goes from this basic little scribble, he does the same exact thing. He takes and he starts to, as Rembrandt did, he starts to work lines going around. Still sort of a scribbly line. No detail. The head here now, for instance, takes and start to feel the shapes going around the head. Simple eyes. Nose is pointing up, looking up. Mouth is open. No great feat in anatomy or anything like that. The things that make his drawings vital is the fact that he is able to so simply to grab the gesture and the vitality in the way that he puts it down. And here, I think there's a hand in there. It's hard to even see. He's got something. He's throwing this stuff up. I don't know quite what it is. Okay. Feel the pants coming down right around the calf. Standing on a chair. Now, he also does the same thing that we had Rembrandt doing. Rembrandt and Rubens doing. He uses the tone to take and define the space. So that if we could see this, if it was a box, very simple shape like this, to make this thing more round, by using tone, we would just take and very simply drop one side or a bottom in shadow. Okay, he does basically the same thing. He just takes and using a wash, comes down, he takes one side of the figure and puts it in tone. He uses the tone going this underneath here, creates a shadow, goes over, and so we have something that starts very definitely taking on a three-dimensional quality that essentially started out with just a series of scribbly lines. Okay, it's very, very economical. Now here he did something a little different. He combined two things. And this is something that you can do all the time. Is here, okay, here we got this figure stretched up. All the lines are going basically up. Here this round figure that's drumming. So the head becomes extremely round. The face, now he's using the same thing. He uses tone to take and show the side, but even the eyes have almost look like a man in the moon type of look. Very, very simple, very rounded type form. Come through. He takes now the main part of the torso, though. The hand comes out here. That's some kind of a drum. He doesn't use a light source per se. Like here, we have a light source coming down. We have a light side, and we have a shadow side. Here, on the head, we have that, but on the figure itself, he uses a local color. It has a dark shirt, and so he treats this as a simple, dark shape. The drum has a shadow side, and he actually has a cast shadow from this figure coming over here in a very simple way doing this. Okay, now let's go into this idea of shape a little bit more. And taking and using the shadows and what have you to help take and create these shapes. Now here's two figures taking and one sitting and the other one sort of leaning. Okay. Again, we start out very, very simple. Just take and start out with standard sort of damier scribbling. But even as you're doing this, what you're doing, you think of the drawing, it's not so much drawing, is that what you're doing is you're analyzing what you're looking at. And so the drawing becomes a sort of a record of all your thoughts. You're continually sort of talking to yourself. Well, you know, the head's like this, and he's got this hat that sticks out. He's really round here, sort of a simple outside contour. You feel any sort of leaning in here, legs come down, going down through here, and just something down there. Okay, the next guy is standing here, and as you're drawing this, if you're looking in like a real life situation, you would be looking at it and say, well, that head sort of comes across where the shoulders are. We take and see simple, again, simple shape, and we see a real strong silhouette here, and I'll come back to that. You see this head, feel the shoulders coming across, and he's leaning also, leaning this way. The arm is coming over, there's the hand in here, sort of got the arms crossed in here. Very free. And so only this knee comes down here. And you don't worry, and particularly in this type of approach to drawing, you don't worry if one line is correct or not, because it's not important. It's whether the sum of all of the lines take and create the feeling that you're trying to see. So we try to come across, down, okay, and he's seated on some kind of bench. Now, from here, we take and we go back and we start to look a little bit more. We come back in and we start to say, okay, now let's see the differences here. Now, he gets a very strong light source. And what he does is he uses the shape of the shadows to take and help create the sense of volume that we see. Now, he looks for the differences. He comes in and looks at this head. We see across, there's a very sharp forehead. The eye socket sitting in. The nose coming out. Got a sort of a real strong beak there. Yeah, so I've got a mustache. And here, to really see, this is really overhanging like this. And this is all done with the brush, where he's taking and giving a shape. As simultaneously he's doing this, he's taking and describing where the corner of that head is. This is all done very simple. And with a brush, this would be very, very fast. Got a beard. And you start to look at it and say, boy, that's really pretty strong type of shape once you start to drawing. When you look at it, start with, you don't feel the, you look at it and say, oh yeah, there's a man's head, and you've got this other guy here. There's a profile. But when you start to draw it, you start to see how strong a shape he's actually made. And this brings up another point here then, is that when we're drawing, we have a tendency to understate things. We have a natural perchance for taking and finding the average. So you have to take and work to take and look at the differences to take and be able to see something. Now this applies whether you're doing a very realistic drawing or a caricature. You look for contrast, you look for the difference. Notice now, for instance, he takes and uses a shadow coming across. Now the shadow, the diagonal line that is here, helps to take and emphasize the fact that he's actually leaning back. The hand, see again, he uses the sleeve to go around. Now I'm doing some of this roundness stuff in here without really having talked about it anymore. We've been discussing it already. You can see the way this goes over, shoulder, comes around. Now, as in the Rubens, he uses his tone to take and help him. To bring this arm out, he uses a tone underneath, coming through. It helps. Volume comes across, over. Very simple. No effort at trying to get all kinds of fancy gradations in there. It's a very, very simple, flat tone. He gets a local color difference from here, but that's about it. Okay, going around and over. Come down the legs, same way. Through. Okay. Emphasize seated here. And it gets in and does a little bit of shaping of the calf. The foot is really not described at all. Down, you feel like there's some pants here. You didn't even draw it on this one. Across, Now, when you're studying, you shouldn't just look at pictures. You shouldn't just take and look at a Daumier or look at a Rubens, but draw from them. Don't be bashful about taking and copying. Take and do like what I'm doing here. Take and draw from the drawings, because you do not really see a drawing until you draw it. Or you don't really see anything until you draw it. You have to take and look. The process of drawing is an analytical process. You're analyzing. You're taking and you have to make decisions. And those decisions help you to take and see what is there. Okay? This is a nice contrast between the two kinds of heads here. One, we don't see the outside contour. It's extremely simple. There's nothing there. He comes in with the shadow and defines a shape. No real detail. It just contrasts. Okay, collar going around the neck, open shirt. Here he uses a vest to take and draw dark value. Interesting shape. Contrast here, we have a very, very light tone against a dark, simple against complex. Basically, very rounded against angular. And this whole figure here is basically, this is all in shadow. Although this is a lighter tone, he's come back and he's really emphasized this in contrast. Okay, let's move on to another artist here. This time, I want to talk about Van Gogh. Now, here's an artist who is very, very interesting in that the general public has a real misconception about him. And the movies that have been made about him and the sort of stereotypes of wild, crazy artist who takes and cuts off his ear and what have you. Spent time in institutions, a madman, etc. Well, in reality, Van Gogh was a very smart, very intelligent person, intellectual. We also think of his artwork as being really a sort of spontaneous type thing. Well, in reality, he spent a tremendous amount of time copying other artists, particularly somebody like Millet. Now, if we look at this drawing, this has a very sort of finished quality to it. But again, the drawings are begun very, very simple. Now, he's closer to a Rembrandt in the essential beginnings of drawing. It's very, very simple shapes. And the thing that comes across in these things is that the drawing really relies on the shapes, the differences. We start to look, we take them first, I'll take and block this in as a very, very simple, this big. And I'm going to take and contrast this drawing with somebody who is completely different. But the drawing has a tremendous similarity to this thing. Okay. Okay, very simple. Notice there's nothing fancy here. Again, like I say, the hardest part of stuff like this is the being courageous enough to take and put those bold shapes down. Now, next step is we take and start to look at the volumes, but he's also looking at the shapes. We find come through, really feel the shoulder, and say the shoulder is pushing up. We push it up. Okay, this arm, and first I'm just dealing a very simple shape coming down. Okay, sleeve. Now here he takes and uses the folds that take and start to pull, going around. The coat pulling over, and the volume now. This takes and describes and shows the direction, the way the back of the coat is picking up. Feel that immediately we get this sense of direction. It's like drawing a tin can going back in there. That line shows the fact that he's leaning in. And we pick up another form underneath in there. Okay. He takes this, be emphasizing more. We feel this, feel the roundness of this form. Notice that I'm following that basic formula that we started out with. First, simple shape, then we come back and we think of the volume. Okay, now here, we look at this kind of shape. Now he's broken this up even more little shapes in here. I'm just trying to keep this up to the simple things to begin with. Okay, here we feel the elbow coming out. It comes down. And really, it's a pretty extreme thing, and he's dropped this in tone here to take, and we get the contrast between here and here. Now, we feel these forms coming back. Feel the baggy pants. Again, shows volume. Now, this thing coming down, feeling pulling from down here. Feel the baggy puts in the folds. Down the contrast here. Really marvelous shapes. The leg pushing down, round. Get down to the leg, bottom of the leg here. We feel the cuffs of the pants going around, over, down. The shoe, standard sort of a Dutch wooden shoe, but it's a marvelous thing for showing volume, drawing around the form. Cross, here. Goes pulling down. Again, going around the figure. And here you really feel this sort of stretch that's coming through. He picks up a little something, just a bump to show we got a knee here. Down, feel the pull. The shape, marvelous shape of these shoes. Great. Comes around. Really bold forms. Hands out. Again, it's shape. The hat, the ear, we see an ear sticking through. The hat goes around the head, across, it's coming up from underneath. And the face is really, there isn't hardly much of a face. All we feel is he uses the shadow, dark, in here for the eye, and the nose is coming out. This is all dropped in tone, and he uses, again, the very simple device of pushing one side in shadow to help us give us a sense of volume. For it to come through here, it describes this arm in here with a very, very simple tone. Now I'm even simplifying it more than he's got it here. But he spent considerably more time on it, I think, too. Okay, here, you can look at the drawing and really feel the way he was taking and putting this thing down. Just dark side, light side. Now the lines in here are going over the surface of that form. Now before we run out of time, I want to take and go through two other guys here. But this, to relate to this, now this is Adolf Menzel, who was completely contrary to, or opposite of Van Gogh in his training. Here we have basically an artist who was trained by himself. Menzel was a product of the academy. And yet their approach to drawing, the same. Here was extremely successful professional artists, portraitists, well known, but his drawing does the same thing. Starts out here, and this is a series of drawings that he did of steel workers. The back here, look at the hat. This guy's got this hat on, sort of like a bowler almost. The shape, but it's a shape. Look at the shape. Everything is said with shape. Down. Guy's got a big. And you have to take a little bit of boldness and just come down, put down the shape, the straps coming across the back, holding up the pants. And he doesn't worry about it whether it's fancily drawn on. He knows he can do that. Here, he's just going for a very, very simple kind of gesture. This is all treated, this part here is all treated as one simple flat tone. Okay, from here we get the drawings. The leg, and he does what we refer to as sort of a direct drawing. He doesn't come back yet an extremely good eye, and he would take and doing it all at the same time. And in fact, now I've talked about breaking this up into a step-by-step type of thing. Well, as you develop as an artist, you learn to take and start doing many things simultaneously. Things start becoming second nature. So that you draw, you're drawing the shape, you're at the same time thinking about the volume, you're taking and using tone, you're using all these things to take and create things in the economical way. So you can really start to feel this very, very big, flat, two-dimensional shape. Now let's take and draw this next same guy from a different angle here. Now, this is very similar to the Daumier now, in that he really pushes the sort of the caricature of the person. Get a hat, and I'll start off again very simple. Down face, you really looked at it and you saw, oh, the chin is really sticking out. The hair and back. The opposite direction from that really helps us to see it. In other words, we could take and actually, in thinking about this, you can see the line from the hair in the back pulling out to the chin. Okay. The neck pulling back here. And right from there, you already start to get a sort of a caricature look. In fact, we have, you look at this and it has a, well, I sort of envision sort of a Popeye look to it. Simple shirt, it's all, one's coming down here, billowing up, down, arm, and you immediately see the arm sticking out. Well, you get out there and you draw the arm out, down, be bold, put it out there. You can't make progress unless you take and risk a little bit. Put it out, you feel it going around. Arm going down in here. He drew this arm out here. He didn't like it, and he scribbled it out. If he can do it, we can do it. Okay, now from here, came back, using the tone, gives a shadow on the inside of this rim of this hat, and around. Very simple device. Notice now we've been talking a very limited number of things, and yet these artists have been able to do tremendous things with them. And it doesn't make any difference whether we're talking about a Hokusai or a Rembrandt or a Rubens or a Menzel. Once again, here, look at the shape of that cheekbone. Feel that nose coming out. The only way to learn how to draw figures is by drawing figures. You have to draw, and to draw incessantly. Restaurants, on napkins, sketchbooks, wherever you are, draw. Today we're talking about modeling form, or analyzing form using light and dark. Now, there's two basic approaches to taking and working with tone. One is an indirect light approach, and one is using a direct light approach. Now, first we're going to take and start working with the indirect light approach. Now, basically, this is what we refer to as an indirect light approach. Now, there's a definite theory behind this. Now, the idea is if you just if you write this down or something like that, and just sort of try to memorize it. It's basically what is facing you is in light, what recedes goes into tone. Now, it's very, very simple, but doing it's a little more difficult than that. The idea is now that it's not how far something is away from you. Remember, it's the degree or turn or change of something is facing away from you. So like we're starting like this sphere. It's the center of the sphere is facing you. So that is taking and would be the lightest point. Now from there, as we take and we go to the outside edges, as these surfaces turn farther and farther away from you, we get darker and darker and darker until we come to the final outside edge, which would basically be a hard, dark, sharp line. Now this is presupposing the fact that we don't have any atmosphere. We're just taking and dealing with this idea. Now, in practical application, we usually don't do this. In other words, we could look at this and it actually starts to look like it could be a hole going back, if we want, like a pipe or something. And we generally take and throw the light source off to the side a little bit so that it gives them more of a feeling for a volume. Now, let's take a look at this little sort of diagram that I've done here. Now, as we could say this is a piece of paper, folded or whatever. The idea now is to try to take and render this using our idea. Now, say, relatively speaking, everything that faces you is in light, and everything that recedes goes into tone. So this surface here, now this is actually an optical illusion through here, that this could be farther away or closer to us. We could see this as going down, or we could see it as coming out. It doesn't make any difference by our ideas now. Okay, so this surface here basically is facing us. The surface here, down here, is facing us, and we have a gradated change in surface. So if we start at this corner, we would be taking and going down so that we would have a sharp edge, there's a sharp corner, and fairly dark because it's turning away from us very quickly. And as we move towards that surface that is facing us, we would get a gradual transition to a light. Okay, the same thing happens as we start working over this surface here. We take and go from the light, we go to a tone, gradual change the surface, building it up, and we would slowly take and work our way up to this next high spot, which is facing us. And as we go over the edge, then again we go into a tone, and it gets darker. Now this tone here will be darker than the surface that I have here because it's turning away from us more. Okay, this then plane is taking and facing us, so that's light. Again, I repeat again, it doesn't make any difference how far away something is right now or how close it is. We're not talking about atmospheric perspective. This is just a simple theory on modeling now. Okay. Now, the next plane here is a flat plane, so the tone is fairly even. Okay. And then we take and have, again, a surface that's facing us. So you can see it's a very simple way of taking and describing a plane, analyzing what these surfaces are doing, as if it was like a ribbon. Now let's take and carry this a little bit farther. Now, okay, here, basically I've just quickly sketched out this is a flat plane going back in space with a hole in it. We could say this is a cup that actually is a rounded surface inside there. Now, according to our theory, this surface, complete surface here, the flat part up top, is going away from us. So we would take and put this surface in tone. Now, the natural inclination is to take and leave that surface light because it's sticking up. Okay. Now, here I will introduce a little bit of atmospheric perspective. In other words, that the idea is that when surfaces go farther or objects get farther away from you, they tend to get a little lighter, a little grayer, and have a little less contrast. So you can see that already in the drawing here, that just by emphasizing the edge that's a little closer to us, it tends to make it come forward, besides the perspective lines that we created. Now, in this cup here, as I come to the surface, I would have to start to get darker, because that, I'm saying this is sort of a rounded edge in here, that this surface in here, as it starts turning underneath, would be getting darker, and the edges of this bowl or cup in here are turning away from me faster than this top plane, so that I have a dark sides, and then the back of the hole here is taking and facing me, so that's receiving the light. Now you can see the application of something like this, say if you were taking and rendering a cup or something like that, that the back side of the cup would be basically light like the front of it would be. Okay. Now, okay, just a simple box. We take and, now we've got our choice. We've got three sides here. Now, none of them are really directly facing us. But it's like I say, it's a relatively speaking. And remember, the point that you're always trying to make is that you're trying to take and describe form. You're trying to take and make something understandable and readable. So you use, these are, I give them as theories or rules. They're not rules. They're tools. And that's the one thing you always have to take and remember. So I would say basically, okay, this is the surface that is facing me the most. Okay, secondly, this one is turning away. So I would be taking and using a tone to take, and again, I'll introduce a little of the atmospheric perspective, make that edge in the corner a little bit stronger, but basically drop this in. Now, the next surface is going away from me a lot faster. So this becomes considerably darker. Okay, now that's the basic theory behind indirect lighting. Now, of course, applying it, putting it to use is really a different thing. Now, this actually applies whether you're taking and, I mean, it happens in reality also. Let me take and do a little diagram here. Now, let's say you
we're looking at a round object right here. Okay, and say this, we're looking down at the top of this. Down here, we have your eye or the viewer, and over here, say we have a light bulb. Now, most people would look at this and say, well, the brightest spot would be the spot that's facing over here, facing the light bulb. Well, it doesn't really work that way. Now, if you just think of your basic physics, you find that, remember, the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection, so that the light that is coming from the bulb is coming over here and it's bouncing straight back. Now, as the light moves on this round surface, it starts to take and bounce a little bit more. And so pretty soon, you're starting to get way over to the side, over in this area here, where the light is going to be coming in. Now, this corresponds to that first drawing that I showed, where I took and I had the highlight, the strongest light, off of the center, over to the side, and start pulling around through here. Okay. Now let's put this to some practical application. Okay, what I'm going to do here is do a drawing from Rubens, Peter Paul Rubens. Now, remember, the point of this is to take and describe and analyze the form. This is what we're trying to take and do. Now, you have to be able to, for what we're working with is tone, you have to be able to take and hold or have the discipline and control of the tone that you're working with. And while I'm doing this, why don't I take and, because this question always comes up. In fact, we just had for my last show, I had a caller call up and wanted to know what kind of pencil I use. Well, let's take and think. Basically, this is just a simple charcoal pencil. And what I'm doing is a simple technical thing here is that you notice that I hold the pencil very, very flat. I'm holding it with all four fingers, my thumb, and I'm sitting down here and I'm making a tone with the side of the pencil. Okay, and you have to develop skills of being able to go from a line to a tone. Okay. Now, and I'm working here. This is a newsprint paper, and this is charcoal paper I'm working with here. Now, as you're doing this, you're continually thinking of the surface. You feel that surface that you're taking and drawing on. So I start to push, I'm thinking the center part that's coming out, and I start to push the tone back. We feel very, very subtle stepping down of that surface. Start to feel that forehead going away. Now, he's got some very, very slight wrinkles in here. Now, I just want to be very controlled, and we'll slowly bring us to feel that form coming around. You see what I'm doing here is taking and in this little area that I'm drawing right here, is I'm taking and essentially talking about already that simple circle, the simple volume. I'm pushing tones away to the sides. Okay. Okay, the forehead, this part comes out. Now, in the total context, we try to always see the whole. Now, we'll jump to this a little bit more. We start to feel this surface as it's going away. See, we're having a light source, according to my diagram that I said before, slightly off to the side. You can feel that surface coming around, pushing away. Okay. Over here, the other sides are pushing larger planes. I'm describing big surfaces, just slowly starting to push this stuff back. Okay. Now we come around, we want to take and pull the eye socket out and start working around. Again, I'm working very lightly to begin with. Actually, I'm drawing a little larger, a little darker so that you can see it. Start pulling, okay, feel, go over. Now the tone here, what I'm doing is I'm taking this tone, and the wrinkle or the fold in the skin here that I'm drawing helps to take and describe that surface. So I'm analyzing this. I'm trying to see that this eye socket is coming down. This tone is going around and over that plane. So you can, it's like taking a corner, having a corner that's like this, and I'm drawing a line that is going around to take and describe that corner. That's what I'm doing with the tone here, okay? The eyebrow does the same thing. It helps to describe this corner here. And pulling over surface, pushing the eye socket down and in. Now notice, everything I've done so far is complying completely to the idea of what is basically, relatively speaking, facing me is in light, and what recedes goes into tone. So I'm taking that surface that are turning away from me and pushing it into tone. Feel the base of this large form here coming down. Feeling the base of the eye socket is coming up. Okay. Feel the cheekbone. Feel the surface going over. Work around that form. Volume. You think of the part that's facing up. It's going back. The top part here, which is actually facing up, is turning away from me. So the tone is going through here. I'm working around this eye. The line that I'm actually drawing now is not really a line. We don't think of it as a line. It's just the boundary where a form is taking and turning away from me extreme. It's going away from me very, very quickly in here. So we feel that surface turning under. Here. The same thing now with the lower part of the eyelid. The whole surface, the top surface of that eyelid is actually facing me. We have a plane. In other words, if we were looking like at the edge of a, oh, it'd be something like this, a board or something like that, bent. This top surface is facing me. The underside is taking and turning away. So we feel this part taking and going in tone as it takes and turns under. The nose, actually the corner or leading top edge here is the part that's facing me. The top part, got a few folds going in here. The edge that's turning away from me out here is in tone. It's going away. Have it come down. Pull around the end. It's turning away. Actually, I can take and feel the bulb on the end of the nose. That part is turning away. We feel the end is facing us a little bit more. Take the plane underneath the nose. That is turning away from me. Okay. The whole side of the nose is going away. So I take and I can feel this plane, and actually the back part up here is turning away a little bit more. I'm drawing the corner. And here I would actually use a tone going over that surface to describe that plane. The back side is going away, real extreme. The nostril is really just a part of a cup. Underside turning away, the back is going away. Now this is still, I'm not taking, notice I haven't used anything like cast shadows or anything like that. I'm just basically taking and treating it with this indirect lighting. What's facing me is in light, what is turning away. Now, this also has the effect, though, of giving the appearance of a light source, because the fact that we have the head turning to 3/4 away and the light source is slightly off, the edge over here gets a strong pronunciation or a strong emphasis of being dark, and it starts to give us a sense of a cast shadow of a light source, or direct light source, I should say. Okay, here, that edge of the eye, lower part of the eyelid there, is going underneath, back, cheek, turning away, now think round. Now Rubens was really the master of this. I mean, everybody knows, of course, about his perchance for very large women. In fact, it's the old cliche. We talk about the heavy model is always a Rubenesque model. Okay. Now, notice another thing here, and this is the thing that the student has a difficulty with, and that is being able to maintain gradations of controlling that pencil. What I'm being able to take and make these subtle tones to not jump in there and start putting down a series of very, very harsh lines. Now, everybody sort of develops their own way about this. There's no other way than really just discipline. One thing I do, if you notice, my fingernails get a little dirty. I tend to drag them a bit. But you have to be careful. That's more of a bad habit than a good habit. Okay, notice now we've made this round feeling for the cheek. We've really pulled this out. Now I'm going to take it and start working around this mouth. We want to start with the septum in here. And we feel that going back away from us, that one side of it, fairly sharp. The other side is facing me, so that's in light. Then the back side over here is taking and going away. Pushing back and around. Okay. The same thing now, the lips. We feel as the center, we have a plane that is going away. This surface here is facing me a little bit more than the plane I just drew. And from here, we get a curling underneath, which is going darker. So you take each one of these things individually, and you think and have to concentrate and analyze what that plane is doing. It's not a question of taking and copying the dark or the light. It's a matter of analyzing what the form itself is doing. So we try to be very, very careful to comprehend what it is that the surface is doing, whether how close it's facing or how much it's turning away. Okay. Now we feel this round part here. We feel this curling underneath in the lip. Stepping down. Feel working around, goes away, and we feel that plane pushing up against the chin so that we have the surface now that we're coming down. In other words, if I draw a line over this, we can see that this part of the lip is sticking out. We get a plane that is sticking back down, and the chin now is taking and coming out this way. So it's, relatively speaking, facing us. Okay, now this chin is actually divided into two spheres. We have a round part here with the center of the light being in here, and we start to push into the sort of the clevis of the chin, feeling the surface going around. Everything's based on the sphere right now. Start to feel round. Okay, corner, feeling that surface turning away from it. Chin, stepping down. Okay, going back. Now the same thing here. We've come down, we've had this surface, we've gone through a series of planes here now. Coming across, this coming around, going down, sticking out, going back down. And it's all a matter of degree, of subtleties. We start now to feel, okay, next plane, maybe this is pushing in a little bit more. Start pushing that dark as we feel that surface going down and in. Then large jowls sticking out. Start to feel. Okay, subtle little form in between. Pulling through. We pick this up. Now you can feel how these forms are fitting, one on top of the other. So it really now becomes this analyze. We could take and break this down in a series of circles and actually draw lines. So that we come in here, we can see that this plane here now is fitting into this. We can come down, we can see that pulling into here. The next plane is coming down, and we can go both ways. We can say it does this. We can feel that surface there. We can feel it coming around, and we can see it pushing down into the plane that's underneath. Okay, now the lower part of the jaw down here, or I should say jowl, is really, this is just essentially like a big inner tube. It's a big rounded surface. Takes and pulls all the way around, coming through, pulling back, through and fitting into the neck. So again, we take and approach it exactly the same way. Now we've got these surfaces coming down and fitting into it. But this place, like for instance, this area in here is facing us, much more so than here. So we would take and we would be pushing the tone down and away. Keep working. Under. Okay, now as I keep going back in here, these surfaces go back away from me more and more. The cheek back here is facing me, is in light. Lip. Now here, I would start to simplify. I am making a little difference between what is actually closer to me and what is farther away. Now we treat everything the same way. Like we start working with the ear, it'll be the same thing. You think of the segments of the ear as nothing more than a series of cylinders like we've got going with this. So that, think of the edge that's turning away. You feel the top part, the outside edge is turning away. And as it curls back, we start to go in tone over that surface. Notice that I try to make, whenever I possibly can, is to make my pencil correspond to that surface that I'm drawing. Pushing in. Now we can carry this to the most minute kind of detail. Okay, now this is the essentials of indirect lighting. And of course this example I've given, it's just one. And you can be working in abstract shapes, whatever. The thing is to take and try to use it. And the hardest part is don't copy the light, analyze the form. Okay, in our last program we discussed the indirect lighting. Okay, now we're going to take and deal with direct lighting. Now the two really take and work together. We don't separate the two things really. Now let's get a little nomenclature here. Obviously the highlight is referred to as the highlight. Now the area in between the highlight and this dark area in here, this point here is referred to as our halftone. And this dark area is the area that is sort of between your direct light and your reflected light that doesn't receive any light, is referred to as the core. Now, this obviously then is the cast shadow. Now let's just discuss a little bit of some of these characteristics of this. First of all, without getting elaborate about this, the kind of surface that you have that you're drawing, it will take and affect the kind of highlight that you have. If you have a very, very strong polished surface, you would have extreme contrasts of light and dark. Like I'm working here on charcoal paper. The tone it's a rough surface, so we have a more of a broader feeling for the light. Okay, the core, the darkness of this would be determined by the strength of the light and the amount of reflected light. Okay. Now, the cast shadow is darkest and sharpest on the edges closest to the object that's taking and casting it. So like, for instance, if we had a cylinder down, the light source from the side, we would have, first of all, as we talked about indirect lighting, the outside edge would be slightly in tone going away from us. We come to our light, and we would gradated tone as we worked away from that to our core. And notice that since I have a rounded, smooth surface here, the tone is a gradated tone. There's no sharp edges. Okay, now we would have the reflected light, and the reflected light is always just a little bit darker than the light. I'm not using the white chalk now. Okay, and it would be a little bit lighter at the surface where it's the closest to the areas that are taking and actually reflecting light. Now the cast shadow would be really sharp and dark next to that surface that's being cast from here. Okay. Now, as that gets farther and farther away from that, this edge would get softer and softer and softer as we get farther and farther away. Now, the main element that I want to take and draw or talk about today is this core. This area is core. The core has become a tremendously useful element for taking and describing form. And again, that's really what our subject is, describing and analyzing form. So let me take and put this to a real practical application right away. Okay. In the last half hour, we were taking and drawing from a Rubens. Well, I'm going to take and draw from a Rubens again. And now, whereas I didn't use the reflected light in the core so much before, now we're going to take and start relying on it. But again, everything's in relationship to the form. And so, and the surface, whether it's how much it's facing you, how much it's turning away. We're always analyzing the form. So I'm going to take a start up here with this shoulder. Now remember, basically we think in terms of round spherical forms. Okay? So we start seeing the top of the shoulder. Now besides that shoulder, besides having a round top surface to it, has a cylindrical arm attached to it that is going back in space. Okay? So now the light source is coming from up here, coming down, basically this way. So I take the surface going away over here, start to use the tone, pushing that back. I want to feel the roundness. Now, what I would normally do in doing a drawing, I would have a tendency to think of the overall. I've basically blocked it already in. But I want to take and work with this idea of analyzing things in terms of round forms. Okay, so we feel that surface going away. Okay. Now as I come around the back side, I'll draw a line. I start feeling this form here is going back down. And feel the edge of that surface. Okay, feel the corner. I would start to see this subtle little form taking place. Start to actually feel a little bit of bone here. Feel this coming through. Pick up the corner of that form and start to feel this edge over here. Okay, now you can see how already this arm takes and has a definite top. We really feel like we're pushing and pulling this thing out. Okay, the edge going back, down, and this arm. Now I'm not going to do too much of this right now, just to get the feeling that we're dropping back. But you can see the use of the core already. The core is taking and describing that surface, and there's a graded edge on it because it's a rounded surface. There's no sharp corners to it. But you always try to take and work both ways from a form. Okay, as we start working around, now I'm going to do a couple of forms here, and then we'll take and start jumping around a little bit, because I want to immediately show you how we take and get the difference between the cast shadow and the core, and how they work for us. Okay, so we feel this coming around. Now you have to see these forms in here. Like we have the shoulder there, the arm going down. We want to see these rounded forms going underneath the arm as a series of cylinders that are taking and going underneath that way. So we take, now feel this, pulling around, and first I'm handling this strictly as I would as if there wasn't any direct light source, just as an indirect light type of rendering. So I'm just feeling that edge, we're seeing the top of it, I'm pushing this thing down. Okay, the next form is doing the same thing. First I'm going to treat it strictly as a large form. It's turning away from me, pulling down, and we actually feel the tone of the breast taking and dropping away to the center, pulling back. Okay. So we can start to see this thing now is round. We've got actually a little bit of form taking place in here. Controlling the values. You should never put so much tone into the light area that we take and we confuse it with the shadow area. At this stage of the game, you may wonder about it a little bit, but we'll clear that all up in a second. Okay, feeling the bit of the rib cage underneath. Now I'm making the tone a little darker because it's a sharper form. Okay, they're pulling forms through, coming around. Notice how we take and feel these things going around, pulling around over the surface. Now I'm going to take and use the cast shadow to take and start describing these surfaces. Okay, now let's just take, basically now, we've got the cylinder, we've got these forms going underneath it. This surface here is taking and casting a shadow going over these cylinders. So we want to use that shadow that this surface is casting over here. It is a way of describing that surface. Just like I was diagramming this, well, we want the cast shadow to do exactly that same thing. So we take and we feel that sharp, okay, it's sharp, it's going over that surface, okay. Now notice that it's darker, it's sharp. Okay. The next form here, now we get I can put in a little bit of a core in here, feel a little bit of reflected light underneath that form. Now we get another cast shadow going over the surface. Now, here we get into something that you have to be careful with. What I'm doing at this point here is I've got a cylinder going in. I'm coming with a cast shadow over that surface that is dark. Okay, so I've got this dark thing. Okay, at this point, it's merging with a core. Now, we have to make that transition of that tone, of that cast shadow, into that basically modeling tone and into working with the core and the reflected light that's taking below. Because we've got this, the reflected light now is a light source coming down from underneath. So we have to make sure that we don't carry that dark past that point. Okay, now we can take and work with that core. Now I'll take and really start to emphasize it a bit. We can start to see a little bit overlapping forms in here, pushing through. Still get the silly rounded form, so I have to make sure I get my gradation in there. Through. Notice another thing that starts happening, that when I start pushing the darks in here, that when I start pushing this dark cast shadow in here and I start putting a line, that we get the illusion that the reflected light is actually getting brighter. Now, people like Tiepolo and Guardi and what have you took tremendous advantage of this. Piazzetta, for instance. Okay. Now we start to feel dark underneath the cast shadow. Now here, the shadow is going to vary as I get farther and farther away from that breast that is taking and casting it. So you have to be careful now as you're drawing to take and feel the surface. You feel the surface taking, okay, it's sharp here, softens up a little bit as we start going over that point, picks up, a little darker. Okay, and now it turns into the core of this form, pulling down. Cast shadow, a little bit of reflected light in there. And like magic, you start feeling the roundness. I think I've said this before, the artist really is the last magician. He's still taking and creating magic. Okay. Now, okay, the cast shadow going over the larger form. Really feeling this big volume now. But here we have a very, very large sort of external oblique, just taking and pulling around. Feel the form. Wrapping. Pushing down as it goes away, we start getting into tone. Okay. Actually, the character I'm drawing here, by the way, is actually supposed to be Silenus drunk. We're the god of wine and merriment and play. Okay. Now here, Rubens does is to take, and he's playing all this stuff, all of this really complex form. The outside contour is very, very simple straight. It's a fantastic design. Very, very simple line against the complex interior. Yet with that line on the outside, and working with this core, we don't lose any of the feeling for the volume. Pulling stuff around, and notice, for instance, here that Again, I'll even make it seem rounder by just working off of that straight line and starting to pull tones through. Just pulling off of that line. The outside line is still perfectly straight. And this is where the student quite often makes a big mistake. They take and they look at a Rubens drawing, and they get seduced by all of those interior lines. They see all these curves, what have you, and they forget to take a look at what is actually really happening. That those outside lines, for the most part, are usually very, very, very simple. Now, Rubens was trying to take and be a classical artist. He was trying to be an Italian. Now, let's just take and keep working farther away. It's the same idea. Now, take and we feel it's turning away. This part of the breast, this side of the chest over here is taking and facing us. As we turn away, goes into toe. So the outside edge out here is really dark just because the surface is turning away. But also makes great sense just in taking and delineating the form. Very thick, the rib cage is a total here. Feel this form pulling underneath. Feel stepping under. Feel over that rib cage. The form stepping away. Feel using a tone here, getting a little darker to make us feel that rib sticking out. Now let's make that belly turn. You can just slowly gradate to that outside edge. Now we could be thinking of this whole stomach area as simply just a large sphere. So now you can start to see how we're taking and are combining both the indirect and direct together as a means of taking and describing this form. Okay, we want to feel the central line come down the abdomen there. Well, we would take and just push that tone in, feel it coming through, and we work our way around that navel. Really make it round in there. Okay, now going back up here to the arm. What I started here was taking and showing this cylinder taking and going back. Now, in diagramming this, what you have to start thinking, and we've discussed really basically the same idea when I was talking a while back in terms of the procedural approach to drawing, that we take and fit one form into another, so that we think of the part that's basically facing us. We start dropping a tone around a corner, get this thing going back, and we pick up the light, again it's facing up, start working around that corner and wedging one form into another. So we take and feel this pushing down, and also use a cast shadow going over that surface. Okay, pick up the form from behind, come around the core, pulling through, stepping back, and he does it again and again and again. And it's basically a formula. Okay, now even in here, now so far I've just treated this as a flat tone. Now, according to what we've been talking about, so this edge of that cylinder is turning away, and that should be going in a tone, and that's exactly what he does. He takes this surface and does this. An excellent way to take and learn this stuff is to do exactly the same way they did, is to take and draw from the old masters. Go to the museum, look at paintings, look at books, work from the photographs. Art really is based on art. In fact, I've had a quote over my desk for a long time with Disney is that, creativity is sort of undiscovered plagiarism. Well, maybe that's overstating it, but it's sort of saying everything's been invented before. But you really learn a lot by taking and looking at other artists' work. Okay, the head would be treated exactly the same way. Think of that corner that is facing us. We push things back, and here he actually uses some vine, a wreath going over the head to help show the volume. Think of the center. We start to push the edges back. We try to feel the corners stepping away. Down. Now you can see how that forehead just really, that corner just sticks out. I mean, it hadn't got any choice. You can feel, come down the edge of the eye socket here, pushing down. Pull out a cheekbone. Down. The eye socket. Here, now he's using a cast shadow to come down and go over and describe different sections of the eye. Now, I'm simplifying that very much here, just to nose. Okay, the cast shadow from the head. Now he's got to use the hair. Uses the hair as a drawing element to take and just go around the skull. In other words, it matches what my hair looks like pretty easily here. Work it around, helps draw that form up there. Okay, now thinking of this sphere, casting a shadow over the shoulder describes that surface. The beard, very, very big shape coming down, overlapping shapes, overlapping lines. Now, one of the best exercises for doing something like this is to take and draw basically inanimate objects to start with. Start by taking and drawing rocks. There's a marvelous beach where I've spent some time where it's just covered with these little beautiful round rocks of all kinds of intricate shapes. And it's amazing. You start drawing, and I've done this with my classes, to take and give them a rock and take and say, okay, now let's draw that rock as if it was 20 stories high and with just all this volume. Look at the drawings, look at the sculpture of, say, a guy like Henry Moore, the sculptor. Okay. Now I'm going to take a little bit and start adding a little bit of white to this to take and see if we can really make this jump out a little bit. Now, you do the same thing with the white, and I'll be taking and covering this more extensively in another show. But you take and first you think about where the center of that form is, what is facing you. Okay? Don't overdo it to begin with. Take your time. Just think. And you try to leave a transition so that the halftone, then that area, the paper almost really then becomes our halftone. Leaving that tone in between the core and the highlights. Now, I haven't really pushed a strong highlight yet. I'm just starting to sneak up on this a little bit. But you can see now the clear distinction between the direct light and the reflected light. Now, what gives you the distinction more than anything else is the fact that the form is understandable. Now, you have to make clear that you know very, very well where the source of light is coming from. It's very easy, particularly in a classroom or a studio situation, to have quite a few different sources of light. You know, maybe have a spot, but then somewhere in the back you've got some kind of reflected light or a fluorescent light taking and shining, and they start giving you lights in shadow areas. And I've seen students take and start putting a light here, and then they go over here and they start putting another light. If you're working with a white, keep it to strictly the light side. Okay, slowly building it up. Okay, now I'll come back and I'll push that a little bit, but first now I want to take and start to force this core a little bit. Start to take and maybe make it a little bit stronger. Start to play with it a little bit. Push it. Okay, now we'll take and wrap this up with a few little hot spots. Oh, again, what I've said before, the thing that you have to take and do is to not to copy the reflected, or not to copy the light, particularly that's falling on the model. You're analyzing form, and you should be thinking form, so that the drawing is an analysis, it's not a rendering of a particular light source. Okay, the classical approach to drawing. Actually, the classical is the state of mind. It's an aesthetic attitude. And the very, very few people were actually classical. Probably the high mark of classicism in the Renaissance was Raphael. And particularly, even there, it was only a very few paintings that he did. But the attitude and the general approach was pretty universal. And that's basically what we're going to talk about. Now, to give you a sense of how this approach developed from the attitudes, first of all, classical, the basic tenets of it is a certain idea of clarity. There's an idea of perfection, of simplicity, ease of reading, a complete clarification of volumes and space. So it's a there's a very, very disciplined approach to approaching the drawing. Now, one of the things that the classical approach, when we look at classical paintings, classical drawings, we think of them as being, people look at Michelangelo, they look at Raphael, and they get so wrapped up in the anatomy. Well, in reality, the classical approach is not a true realism. They use what we refer to as synthetic form. They recreated the figure. And let me check and give you some examples of what we're talking about now. I'm going to be basically drawing from paintings by Raphael. Okay. Now, by synthetic form, what I mean is that what they did is they took and would, instead of trying to draw a skull or what have you, they would take and draw a simple oval that would take and create the illusion, or becomes a symbol for that skull. Okay, in other words, the most simplest and clearest form is just the basic simple sphere. Okay, the head starts becoming, this becomes sort of the basis for everything, this idea of this very, very simple round volume that's very, very simply understood. Now, they would take and work with this basic idea. So taking from here, in other words, we're going into a cylinder. Now, this all takes and comes out of a development of trying to go back to the philosophy of the Greeks. Now, the Greeks philosophically felt that they were trying to take and to get an idea of perfection. They had what we call the harmony of the spheres. They were trying to find ideal proportions, ideal lengths, ideal widths. Everything had to fit together in a certain way. And so they tried to take and find these simple, ideal, perfect way. A thing that took and was beautiful had to function well. It had to be, rather than realistic. An example would be that one of the things that if a person was ugly, they obviously were evil. The idea, if you look at Greek sculpture, you'll find that they were always taking and perceiving and trying to show the beautiful. So this ideal, everything was an ideal, everything is an ideal. So they would take and start out thinking in terms of these synthetic forms, building, developing form. Now, I've talked about this in other terms. We've talked in the past about the procedural approach to taking and doing the drawing. Okay, now what I'm talking about more is the actual forms and how they would try to take and develop these perfections. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing here is just very simple, round volumes. There's no effort at anatomy at all. I'm just taking and building up these simple forms. Now, okay, in fact, I'm just dealing with a fragment here of this figure. Now, part of this, now we could take and do this where I was taking and doing a very contorted type of thing, like some of the drawings I have on the wall here, where we take and maybe we had an extreme foreshortening, something going way back in space. Okay, here what we have in this Raphael is a very simple, there's a simple movement to it, a simple way the forms start to flow, the way this arm starts taking and coming across. In fact, one of the hallmarks of sort of a classical or Renaissance pose is exactly what we're getting here, where you take and it's the idea of transition, where I don't know if we can see my whole body here. I'll see if I can take a pose, but where we find that the feet may be taking and facing one way, where the chest will be taking and facing another way, and start to get a turn as we're taking and moving, and the hands would maybe start to take and move this way, and then the head would be taking and turning the other way. Okay, it's referred to as a contrapostal thing, where there's a rhythm. It's also playing of opposites. The primary reason that this was developed was so one could take and understand the figure in a very, very, from every different angle. There's no unknowledgeable or ununderstandable parts to the whole thing. I'm getting here wrapped up in my words. Okay. The idea, we take and, okay, it's very, very simplified, clear masses. Now, in terms of the space, the same thing comes into play. We're trying, as we're doing the drawing, we try to take and think in terms of how we take and describe these volumes. Now, this is just a general idea. You can see where these are not realistic forms. They're not anatomy. They're synthetic forms. Now, let me take and carry this into a little bit more detail. Okay, now this is I'm going to take and go into some parts on this. This is a drawing of a child, and we'll take and carry this through. Okay, first, foremost, the idea of the total. So what we would be after would be trying to take and find first the basic rhythm, basic flow, what the action is. And you notice that this pose is going to be very, very similar to the one I was just taking and drawing, although it's a child, it's a different thing completely. It's simple rhythm. Okay, the head, clear, volume. And that's one of the reasons you take a look at Renaissance art a lot, and you find particularly the classical stuff, that they have a certain kind of a stereotype. Again, it's that idea of taking and working for an ideal. Feeling, simple mass. And again, I'll repeat, it's a simple pose. It's exactly the same pose that we just had on the other thing. This is a child. Okay, so going up. Okay, now, when I'm saying everything is sort of based on these simple volumes, let's take and break it down even farther and see how this takes into parts. Okay, obviously you can see how this head is taking and just working off of a simple sphere. We feel that cheek is just part of that. We can think roundness here. Okay, the neck is a round. Now this is a cylinder, but we keep working around, drawing as if it was almost transparent, and emphasizing the lines that take and show how we go around the form. Okay. Now, I've already got this started here. We've got the rib cage area taking and begun. Okay, now when he starts taking and working into the parts, like for instance here, he starts to come in and talk about the shoulder. Okay, he does the same thing. It's part of a sphere. He's taking and coming over that form. He's taking, coming around. It's basically a series of circles. Taking the arm, we find that he does the same thing here. He starts going around, working over from one side of the form to the other. Okay. Down to the elbow, same thing. Forearm, going round and over. Now, one of the criticisms of this type of drawing is basically, and as you can see it right here, is that it's referred to a lot of times as sort of formula drawing, which basically, it is a formula in a sense. Now, the formula, though, is something that takes and strives for a kind of aesthetic, a certain feeling. Somebody like Dürer spent his whole lifetime taking and trying to develop and find what these perfect proportions were. Okay, I'm continually just trying to relate everything to a simple sphere. And so we find all like the hip area. Okay, the minute I take and hit this side of the form, I come over and I try to relate and see this as a part of what's going on over here, and continually working around that figure. I can take the stomach area, feeling like I'm going over the surface, coming around. Okay. Going down. There. The legs, same thing. Take and pull. One. Again, it's thinking of this sphere. Now, you can look at the drawings of, say, a Michelangelo. You can look at people much closer to our own times. You could take a look at, say, somebody like some of the classical stuff that Renoir was doing, or even some of the classical stuff that Picasso did. He was always dealing with this very, very clear, massive space, round. I would go over part of a sphere, down. Now you always get the, from students you always get to say, well, gee, I've got to study anatomy, I've got to study anatomy. Well, anatomy is important, but anatomy is not the thing that makes the drawing. What you need to know first, basically, is how to draw. Now what I'm dealing with here are essential basic drawing skills. The idea of being able to take and see things in space, to draw around over a form, and working within a basic procedure. Round. Now, let's take and do what he did here. He took and drew a fragment. Let's take and now, as you start carrying this thing farther and farther, you find that you can get more and more realistic, more simplified, though, than reality, but still creating the illusion of reality. Because what we're not doing is we're not copying realism. We're recreating it. And we're recreating it in a two-dimensional term that takes and communicates the three-dimensional. Okay, so here I'm thinking, okay, this is a part of a leg. This is basically a cylinder that's going back down in space. We have a foot that's taking and coming out. Okay, and just take and block in roughly this sort of the rough shape here so you can see what I'm taking and trying to do. Now, as he's trying to get this thing going back, still relying on a simple cylinder, sphere, take and working from one side to the other, coming down. Try to show forms, one form fitting into another. And I'm not exaggerating this stuff now. When you take a look, and again, you should take a look at the drawings of the old masters, and particularly the drawings that are unfinished. You can see how this fits in. Okay. Now, from here, okay, we get a change in direction of form. We start getting now the leg pulling out. Now you can start to see how this, again, is part of a sphere. Start feeling this form coming out. And it actually starts to get here. Now, into the parts, we start to take and we feel like this is fitting into or on, okay, the ankle bone. Feel here. And think across to here. Okay, now, I'm not saying that we ignore anatomy. We use it. Like, for instance, in here, the idea that the bone on the outside of the leg is lower and is higher on the inside. You start to use the information that you can. You use it for your purposes. Okay, from here, now we try to feel the heel going behind. But again, we think of that total form that's going underneath, how this goes behind. Okay, this is coming forward. Feel. He emphasizes the pinching of how this pulls in. So we're getting here, the outside of the foot, curve. Again, it helps to take and contain this volume. Toe. Now the big toe, again, he takes and it's really just a sphere. Now my own background is basically in a very, very classical attitude and approach to drawing and painting. Although I'm working in the animation business, working at teaching at Disney and working there, a lot of my old friends get a little irate when I take and tell them that the closest thing we have to classical drawing now is really animation drawing, because we have the same ideals, same sense of trying to take and work for clarity, simplicity, volume, transition, all the same basic elements, except that the aesthetics is different. The kind of form that we draw is different. The proportions are different. Now, which goes back, I started talking earlier about the proportions in terms of somebody like Dürer. Dürer took and got very, very interested in the classical. Everybody was trying to take and be a classical artist. Okay, Dürer being in the north, he wanted to be like an Italian artist. And there was an itinerant Italian painter who came through, and he tried to get the secrets of what's the secrets of the of Renaissance, what's the classical secrets, and this guy just wrote down some proportions for him. Gave him a drawing, what proportions of the classical proportions were. Well, Dürer thought that was too simple. It had to be more than that. So he took and literally spent his whole life compiling a notebook trying to perfect proportion. So proportion becomes something more than just the fact that a head is 7 3/4 heads high. Proportions becomes an aesthetic thing that we use. Now the next element I want to start talking about is this idea of sort of continuity and fitness. Fitness is really becomes saying, okay, another Raphael drawing here. Now, in discussing fitness, what we do, and again, it's an intellectual thing, not necessarily something that we look at the model and copy. The model just becomes an excuse. Okay. So the next thing is that we try to, as we're drawing, we continue to notice what I do is I'm continually taking, for instance, moving my hand around and over. Okay. Part of this is I'm taking and trying to see how one line pulls into another, where they relate. Okay. In the neck here, this is taking and pulling down. Again, thinking of this as a cylinder. Now, I'm not going to take and be quite as diagrammatical in terms of drawing the cylinders, what have you, but to start seeing this, okay, how one pulls, feel that neck pulling down. We feel now the whole torso. First, try to see a simple mass. Thinking of a rib cage, pelvic area. Okay. Leg is taking and pulling down. Again, very simple. I'm thinking, even though now I'm not being quite so obvious with it, I'm still thinking of the round. It's basically feeling the idea of the spheres, and they'll take and develop more. You'll see them more clearly as we take and go farther with the drawing. Over, under. Okay, this arm is taking and coming down. Up. Arm pulling up, and it's actually cropped in the original. Now, here he tries to take and marriage the design with the action. Now, basically, somebody reaching up. So we get this strong stretch. You'll notice that now what he gets going here, the gal is kneeling, but you find that these lines start to build and work up. Okay, we start getting, first, got the arm, which is reaching up here. Now we can feel this pulling straight into the line of the neck, and we find this now pulls into the line of the arm. It's keeping this thing going. So he's actually taking then and composing. He's reorganizing what we would see in reality. to meet his needs. Same thing with the back. Everything, you notice just the overall shape tends to go along with this. Okay. Now, as we keep going in here, he takes and start delineating the volumes a little bit more clearly. For instance, he uses, and this is a standard device, of something like hair or band or something going around the head to help describe the volume. Diagramming it, going over, around, and it's this follow-through. It's this little bit of hooking of a line past an edge, rather than coming up to something like this and just pulling a straight line where it would take and flatten out. There's nothing in this to take and tell me that this form would be going over. You have to actually take and draw it through. Here, he uses a cast shadow from the head going over it, and I'll treat it just as a line right now, going over to help describe the volume of that neck. Okay. It was a very simple line. Now, in fact, we could take and see that we have practically a common line that starts to carry through in here, which helps us to see how the back or the shoulder blade here is sticking out. Again, the shoulder blade is made to fit the length by coming out, flattening out, which it does in reality anyway, pulling out, and then coming back down. The other shoulder over here, differences from one side to the other, in other words, from one line to the other. But still, it doesn't break this line. There's nothing going across here to take and injure this little direction. He uses the shadow coming across the form to, again, keep this thing going. Picks up the end of the form here, around. Again, he's describing the volume of this shoulder. Pulls the arm out from that. Now, this has been taken and developed more over here. You can see how the clavicle would be, the sternum. Again, you can see it's very, very simple volume. Okay. Now, this pulling in front. You notice how, as I keep going, I keep going back over and around and back over. Just the actual physical act of moving your hand helps you to take and feel the fitness of the form. Like for instance here, now we find as I'm drawing this, even though in here we have the back comes down, we find part of the buttocks muscle coming out here, and then we feel another form going behind underneath. What we try to do is find the continuity. Part of the idea is the transition. We want to be able to get around a corner. Okay, like what we find is in a Renaissance or a classical idea, instead of going from this to that, what we try to do is go around a corner. We try to feel a line, then make a transition from this, then make a transition from that, and then we go to that. So in going around this corner, I try to find means, is what Raphael did, is try to find means of getting the eye to see these forms going around a corner. So first, we get over here, this line carries through, and we feel this very, very simplified volume. This pulls around, fits in. Okay, then he comes around the next form here, and so from what we have here is this goes into the leg here, is we have this right angle I was talking about. Now the next form is a transition through this where he pulls that form, starts cutting across that corner, coming around that volume. We're going over that surface. Okay. Feel the fitting in here and cast shadow off of here. Okay. So you can see now how this starts to take and work around that corner. Now here we can see again how this fits in very clearly. It makes a real point out of taking and making this thing pull. Okay. This gives us sort of the basic idea of what we're trying to get. The idea that you start out with a very, very simplified form, and then you start to knit the thing together. The hallmark of a classical piece is where everything is woven in as a total. Okay. What we started in the last one was the way we knit everything together. Now I want to take in this drawing and carry this one a little bit farther and start developing some of these ideas a little more to a finished state. Now we've discussed the idea of the volumes. Okay, now here I'm working with the hair, and for instance what I'm doing here is taking and seeing this center of the form, very clearly establishing where it's at. Okay, working stuff going around the form. Now I've already taken and blocked in a bit of the figure here, so we have a little more time to take and go a little bit farther. Okay, and the basic procedure now is to go from the general to the specific. You're always taking and trying to find the total. So start out working and continue trying to relate one form to the other. I've already got my big basic volumes already established here. Now, okay, try to feel, basically feeling the rhythm, trying to feel the way this back, the gesture comes through. And as I'm doing this, I immediately, besides thinking of this as something that's going over the volume of the rib cage, I want to see how this pulls into, for instance, the stomach over here. So start with talking about a basic sort of rhythm. This line, I start feeling this to this, pulling over to here, coming down, feel the leg. Now this would carry straight into the calf. So as I'm doing this, you can start to feel this sort of basic rhythm that's coming through. Now, as this arm is pulling forward, I want to take and start to feel the stretch, feel these forms going over, and again, relating things to those simple spheres. Now, I've got big ones going here. I may now start breaking these down into smaller forms, but it's continually seeing the round. So work over. Feel where the bone is here. I'm thinking the round here. Think of this shoulder. It's going back. This arm is going in. Feel the corner of the form. Now, he takes and we've got, okay, I'm talking about this sort of rhythm that takes and pulls through here. As he's taking and working, we're trying to find how everything flows together. Okay, the leg is going back. He picks up forms now that take and relate to this. We feel this leg coming. We feel the torso taking and coming down. Feels this. This starts to pull with this. Now he creates this line by taking and using anatomy, taking and feeling where the corners of the form are here, and he compiles a series of tones that take and create a line. At the same time, they're taking and describing a volume. Going around, feeling this form as it's dropping down, again working basically the simple sphere. Over, corner, you can see how this is very specifically fitting into that waist area. The other side. Now, he also takes and plays the kinds of forms. In other words, what I'm saying here, we have a very, very simple area here. He takes and plays in a very sort of complex. He starts out, it's different. He doesn't repeat all the time. Feels coming down, another variety. Come down, feel form coming in. Small form here. Again, this shows how this is going to be fitting into the scapula. And you can't help but to see, as I'm working on this, how the drawing becomes just very, very basically round. Everything starts very clear. Feel, okay, here would be where the latissimus dorsi is fitting in. Rib cage on the back side, round. Feel this pulling over. As I'm doing this, thinking, and this shoulder is pushing and pulling out that way. So I can feel these forms wrapping, round, going over. And big forms. Then we take and we start pulling the smaller forms on top. Here, basically the shape of the scapula. Now, like I said earlier, that Raphael was really one of the top people in terms of talking about classical art. He was also extremely influenced by Michelangelo and Da Vinci. And so you'll find that his art went through a lot of changes. There were periods where he became more concerned for anatomy, reality. Okay. Feel. But still, that basic training in the beginning, his primary emphasis in the start was essentially classical. Now, remember that he died at the age of, I think it was 38, so he didn't have a long time to take and develop. Okay. Feel. Okay. Again. You can see, keep working over. Everything seems to flow one into the other. Simple volumes. Now this shoulder is pulling back. As this is stretching forward, this is pulling back, and you can find the forms start to bunch up. Again, differences from one side to the other. Now he really pushes this out. But what you also get here is that if we look at this line that I've got right here, this does not really help us to see the fact that this shoulder is going out. We feel, look at this line here, to make this go farther, he takes and he really now starts pushing the scapula out. And this actually is an exaggeration. You can start to feel these lines pulling out, and he takes and wraps this form around that one. It'd be very difficult, I think, to find a model that would actually look like that. But he does it in such a convincing way, we don't question it. Shoulder, see where they come to the end, very clear, concise. Deltoid pulling out, see simple forms first. Get your length, your width. Okay. Before I go too far with that, let's take and carry this down farther. Now, part of this, getting this to go this way, we find this angle now is picked up in the angle of the stomach, taking and coming out this way. This becomes now part of the whole way of getting us around a corner again that we talked about before. So we feel now also it helps the gesture. We feel this pushes out as this helps push that way. It's coming in. Now, transition, how we fit in here, really goes over that surface. Pulling over. Oh. Now the tension that's created by the stretching there makes it really feel down. Simple shape. Okay, going over. First, we have the overall shape feeling for the buttocks. That simple mass. Now we look at this and you can see how clearly we could take and diagram this into something where it would be just very simply something fitting in, coming down and fitting into this. We could even draw this as a box. We start to see this. We could feel the corner of this, and this maybe stretching, so a little bit turning that way. We start to feel that twist. So we feel this coming down and changing direction. Okay. Now from that he takes and even does more. He starts making us really, we start to feel this buttocks coming out by pushing, shapes, at a simple form here. See this? Now he starts pulling us out farther. He sort of squares this off a bit. And the tone is going around, goes over. Each one of these forms now is very clearly fitting one into the next. Feel the bone protruding through here. Now here he takes and he's continued this idea of finding the corner. This is all in tone here. You can see where this line now starts to carry itself in here. Now, you just shift it over slightly, and we feel the corner of the core. Leg comes down, very graceful curve, pulling in. At the knee is out here. Feel the stretch back. Now here he takes and see how this is fitting in. Now the leg, this side is low, the hip is up over on this side. So we find the buttocks is higher over here. Again. Round. Simple volumes. Think always going around, around. Okay. Talked about the sphere. We see volume here. round and over. I can see that fitting in. Here, the back, the knee. Corner. And he stretches out his proportions a bit. Over the surface. Okay, let's go back up here. Now, we start looking at the pieces a little bit more here. And here, the idea of seeing the continuity here, let me take and see if I can draw this a little larger here where we can see what I'm talking about. What we want to do here, I'll just maybe just diagram a little bit, is to find this fitness in here. Now what he does is the first inclination would be, if somebody was looking at a model here, we would have a tendency to take and just draw something like this, where we take and see a lump up here where the trapezius comes down and we feel a deltoid coming down, fitting in, and we start picking up the trapezius and it's something like this. Well, what he does is he really takes and ties it in. This line, it's again fitness. You feel this pulling, that line pulling through into the elbow. We make this come off of that line, come down, and fits in. And the tone that we have up here is part of what's creating this line. Okay. Comes through. Okay, feel the trapezius pulling off of that line. Hit the volume. It's the other side of that form. Over. Going down. And then this carries down to but you can feel that line. The same thing we find in here. It's that volume first. You find it coming through underneath. Still working the round. Forms pulling in, going down, and then he makes a real strong point of showing how this fits, like the end of that cylinder fits in here. Now as he does this part of the arm, forearm here, again he starts out very simple, straight. Comes out to where the elbow is, the wrist. He carries the shaft of that arm through. Now he's anatomically correct also at the same time. But we take and you feel, first it's this, then we build the muscles on top, or these simple forms. You feel this, pulling off that line, coming back to it down here. Through. And he plays a little bit short shift here with the hand. Okay. Now the same thing as we start going back this way, we're going back in space that way. Okay. So again, the forms, everything is made to fit, to help to go in that direction. We find, okay, over. We feel across the end of that form. It's like drawing the end of a box. Over. He uses the anatomy to help describe this coming over. You can feel this fitting in. So you can see the trapezius, the end of the scapula, and clavicle fitting in there. Into the deltoid. And now this takes and pushes down. And he goes around the form with it. Okay. So this, think of where the elbow is. Again, simple, straight first. And even here, he gets a bit of a rhythm. In other words, we feel, and a lot of this is a natural rhythm also. In other words, we feel this here. We think of that line, but in the overall, we're also trying to see how this comes up, pulls into that, but this takes and pulls up into this up here. Okay, now let's carry this far. We feel here the tone. It's going back. He makes his lines literally wrap around the form. Okay, we feel the biceps, and he takes liberty with this now. He takes them where it actually sticks out, how it comes in. Feel his form fitting in, and he pulls that tone around that. All of this here is in shadow. Okay. So that's the end. Going around, and again here he's dealing more with his ideal of how things should fit rather than reality. The way he draws this fitting into there, and he has this going around. It doesn't really go like this. This part here fits in, but that you wouldn't see anything near like that. But not many people ever. If you do it convincingly and clear enough, most people will never question it. And in fact, again, remember that we are not copying reality. What we're doing is we're creating an illusion. And the classical approach is more than anything is this sort of this aesthetic illusion. It's working for a monumental, something that's going to take and last forever, timelessness. So which is part of the idea of taking and trying to knit and make everything feel like it flows in to everything else. It's composing. It's organizing. Over. Now, one thing that I am doing that is quite different than what we find Raphael or Michelangelo or Da Vinci did is that I'm taking and drawing with a broad side of my pencil. What they worked with primarily, whether was a crosshatch line. In fact, the drawing that I'm drawing from here was built up by tons and tons of small, fine crosshatch. Now, what this does, if you can think about it a little bit, is that to work that way, he had to have a very, very clear concept of what the total was. He had to take and be very disciplined and make all of the parts subordinate to that total. He couldn't allow himself to get wrapped up and carried away with any one part of the drawing. He had to keep thinking about the whole thing, going back over it again and again and again, and slowly developing the whole drawing. Now I'm doing this drawing here in a period of what, maybe 20, 25 minutes, okay, where chances are that this drawing in the original was done possibly, hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. And again, notice what I'm also doing is that I'm taking and going over the drawing again. I'm working over the whole thing, coming back. Let's see if I... Another thing else that I'm doing that is different, of course, is that I'm working tremendously large in comparison. The original drawing was probably, I figure maybe about this big, maybe 8.5 by 11, 8.5 by 13, 14, something like that. Very, very, very small drawing. So it was less than half the size that I'm working. Showing here very clearly how the ankle fits in. Actually, this is calf could be come out a little bit farther. Now, this is fairly realistic in terms of proportion, although he's taken liberties. Like, for instance, the feet are small. Well, the guy could have been this developed. That's not, but the main proportional difference here is that for instance, he's drawn the feet a little small. Fitting. Okay, the next step in the drawing would be, actually it's something that you're thinking about the whole time as you're working on it, is to try to maybe pull out a little bit more and to emphasize the basic movement a bit more. Like here I'm taking and starting to push the rhythm. I want to feel this fitting in. Now, this really is the start of the classical drawing, in a sense that what you do is you take and you start working to get the total, and you come back and you continually take and refine. I'm sure before this ever got down to the painting, the drawing was done many, many, many times. That in the painting, then it changes. Things keep adjusting. You keep working. You keep feeling. You keep looking for this total. And if there's anything that the classical drawing, classical painting has over anything else, is that it's the emphasis on total over everything.